remain the same. It's just at a different level of scale and requires different responses.
So from the very beginning, if I understand it correctly, Harambee was initiated as a private-public partnership. That's very interesting. What industries did those founding companies represent?
Yeah, so they represented both the broader services and financial sectors, as well as actually hospitality businesses, which for us was a great starting point. Probably the most interesting fact is that we worked with a bunch of companies who were competitors to each other, and that was a critical kind of founding principle because it established Harambee as, in essence, a shared service to all businesses. We weren't necessarily getting involved in what individual businesses obviously needed to do for themselves, and the fact that competitors could come together and see that this was a value add across an entire sector and indeed across the entire economy, I think has given us exactly the right kind of positioning. And in fact, we work in almost every sector now in the South African economy and very regularly with competitors who see us actually as a place for them to also learn and understand some of the trends that are facing their sector because of the kind of breadth of experience and what we're able to see.
I think that's a really, really interesting insight, Maryana. Maybe even a bit of advice for our listeners. As competitors in the marketplace, you can come together to solve common problems, to create value-add solutions that individually cannot be solved. I'm not sure whether you remember, but before joining Microsoft, I was the VP of certification programs at CompTIA, the Computing Technology Industry Association. Their well-known contribution to the industry is and was the creation of vendor-independent, cross-industry technology certifications that serve companies in this sector across competitive lines. Now, change of subjects again. I know that Harambee is very, very good at measuring the outcome of your work. I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the impact that Harambee has driven over the last couple of years. And are there any accomplishments that you are most proud of?
Well, as you know, Lutz, when you're tackling a very complex social problem, you have to really think hard about what is the result and what is the impact. So certainly we believe very strongly in numbers, and numbers tell us that we are able to reach the individual lives of young people and we're able to reach businesses. And so we have, as you said in the introduction, grown a network of young people that is just under 700,000 and will cross over to 1 million in 2020. And certainly that number gives us a huge amount of pride. But as we know, the problem we're trying to tackle is even bigger than that. And so second to that isn't just what are the individual young people we are reaching, but more importantly, what are we learning about them that can speak to policy, that can speak to incentives, that can speak to the things that our businesses can control and change that will have much more far-reaching impact. And so alongside the numbers is a very clear sense of being able to change the hiring practices of the employers we work with, changing the policy frameworks and approaches of government. And I really want to echo what you've just said. I think that businesses and those of your listeners who are only thinking about their own organizations, I think are really going to fall behind. This is almost a world in which partnerships and unlikely allies and new ways of building bridges are going to almost be a prerequisite, I think, for success and for staying ahead. And I think that those kinds of things have been important success metrics for us in terms of our government partnerships and our expansion into new markets as well.
Yeah. We will talk about your partners a little bit more later on, but right now I want to focus more on the partners, your target audience, the young people that you work with to start with. You are serving young people that have completed schooling or have dropped out of schooling but cannot find any work. Why is the state-run system struggling so mightily to put people to work, to actually accomplish what they set out to do? Why do they struggle to prepare young people effectively?
I would say that this challenge is global, and I'm sure listeners in every country will agree that the kind of mismatch between what is coming out of our education systems and what our economies and labor markets require is growing further apart, not closer together. I mean, there's been research whether it's been in the industrialized North or the global South, I think that confirms this point across the board. The added challenge, I think, in the South African context is that we have an education system that scores very well on access and very poorly on quality. So many of our young people can access schooling, which is not the case, I would say, across the continent, but the quality of what they are getting in the school-based system is certainly not responding to the job market. And so what we see is that young people who certainly drop out are struggling at a very different level, because even those who do get qualifications, whether it's a high school diploma or even tertiary education, may still struggle to find work because employers don't trust the value of those qualifications as being able to speak to what the young person can do. So as part of our job, we certainly do have to upskill young people. So I don't want to say that that isn't part of the job, but actually the more relevant work is to partner with our businesses and with our governments on what it is that helps them see what the young person can do, and maybe not just what the poor education is that they've received. And this idea of finding new ways that young people can show what they can do, not just what is on a piece of paper, I think is a theme that we'll return to in the work of Harambee.
Yeah, I think in one interview that I listened to with you is you mentioned something along the lines of it's actually the employers and the government agencies that have to change more than the young people. Do you want to elaborate on that? What did you have in mind?
I mean, I feel so passionately about this point, so I hope if there's nothing else your listeners take from the podcast. I mean, I spend my days in a center surrounded by thousands of young people. And so for me, what I can see is that mostly these are young people that have been failed by the systems around them, whether it's a broken education system that they didn't have any say in designing, whether it's dysfunctional social services that make their efforts to get what they need much harder, whether it's disjointed transport systems. And what I find interesting in this space is that when people think about education and employment, the first place we go is the training of the youth and the upskilling of the youth. And there's no doubt that our young people need training, they need upskilling. But actually, the people who hold the power and hold the resources tend to be the governments, the businesses, the nonprofit organizations. And so actually, I think the work is almost more on us than it is on them. Because the young people, now there may be young people who are not putting their hand up and who are not trying. Those are not the ones that we see. If a young person finds their way to Harambee really against all the odds, by the time they've gotten here, they've demonstrated that they are willing to do what it takes. They're willing to put in the effort. And so I just find in the sector, making the entire conversation about the kind of additional training we need to give young people, I think misses the point that in many respects, we hold the tools to fix the systems that are around them that are broken. And if we could actually do that more quickly, we would enable them to realize their potential and get to these opportunities much more quickly. So thanks for giving me a chance to share that.
And to be honest, I think we should actually stay on that point for a second, because it's such a radical shift in perspective. Such an important point that you are making is it's us representing organizations, companies, government agencies, you name it, that have to change more than the young people that obviously have to pull up their socks as well and do their part, but that have to do the hard work as well. Do you have an example or two for us what that could look like when it works out, where the receiving organizations have changed and helped to build the bridge that has to come from both sides?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I'll just give a couple of examples. I mean, we have seen, and again, I think this is a kind of a globally relevant trend. So certainly we see it in the South African context, but I do think that the way businesses try to assess talent, it just needs a rethink, because we are either relying on competency-based tests that actually don't relate to what the job requires, or we're looking for qualifications because that's how it's been for years and years and years. And when we do that, it doesn't matter how talented that young person is, they're just never going to get their foot in the door. And the point you're making is exactly right. It is much easier for a business who really holds all the power and all the cards, for them to change their approach than for a young person who, again, has struggled beyond the odds to get whatever the degree is they have, to go back and get another one or to go get more upskilling for something they may not even need, for me is a very concrete example. And I think we have an immense amount of pride in the many businesses who have taken that on board and have said, actually, some of these things that we require don't make any sense when you think hard about what's needed. And sometimes businesses have to be brave in admitting they don't know how to measure what they need. And so they're holding on to things maybe because they don't know and they need help. And I think that kind of approach is for me a very concrete example. One business changing its policy can open up thousands and thousands of opportunities and can be done much more swiftly than changing thousands and thousands of young people through very long and expensive training.
Yeah, you in a speech that I saw you give, you managed to show us how nail polish and weightlifting can be a crucial element of employability. You have to tell the story, Maryana. How does nail polish and weightlifting come into the play?
Well, because we are maybe thinking about the role of learning, I think this is a really relevant point. Harambee has demonstrated, I think, over many years and with many partners that this kind of obsession about technical skills and competencies can sometimes completely miss the point of what's needed to succeed in a job. And I gave an example that we had partnered with a company around getting young people into jobs as butchers, which is a scarce skill and has many vacancies. And this is a trade with a career path and an ability to earn. And the historic approach had been to give somebody a math test and to, again, look at a set of qualifications and then to put them in a training in a classroom where they would come in and, have the kind of traditional papers and like. If you think about what it takes to be a butcher, you have to make sure that person is going to cope with blood. You have to make sure that person understands that they're going to be standing up in a cold room. You have to make sure, certainly for the young women, that they understand that in that job, you're not allowed to wear nail polish. And the irony of spending, which governments do, a huge amount of money training somebody to be a butcher in all of these traditional ways, only at the end of that process to discover that the young person is not able to, be in an environment that is a cold temperature. The young person is not able to stand on their feet all day, or as I said in the talk that you referenced, parting ways with their nail polish just isn't going to happen. And those seem like maybe counterintuitive insights, but the bottom line is, why would you go and spend on intensive training program and not have thought about these fundamental, even if they may seem cute and small, but these quite fundamental job requirements that don't show up in the traditional competency and maybe qualifications-based approaches.
Thank you so much for sharing that really insightful story, Maryana. This story, for me at least, exemplifies what in my mind is one of the hallmarks of Harambee's work. It is this incredibly deep and insightful deconstruction of what it takes to put young people into work on both sides, the job candidate and as well the potential employer. I remember visiting you a while back and seeing that some of your classes were actually taught standing up, because the young people that were prepared in those classes were getting ready to become shop clerks. Hence, you are trying to mimic in your training sessions the job realities of the positions they are preparing for. Which brings us to the next topic I wanted to cover with you. Let's talk about how Harambee actually approaches the work of youth employment acceleration. You're not a traditional school, clearly. You're not teaching youth for month and month or even years at a time. What are you doing differently? What makes Harambee so unique and successful?
Well, I think, Lutz, it's exactly what you've said, which is, we take, we really take as a first principle understanding what the job is and working backwards from that. And I think that this idea of people kind of designing training programs or designing learning interventions when they themselves are not 100% sure what the actual job is at the other end is one of the trends we have to work very hard to change. And so what we do is we say, let's start with really getting into the detail of what the job requires. And as I said, sometimes what the job requires is standing on your feet for 10 hours a day. And in some of the retail and hospitality interventions, we've learned that a young person who does not understand that is an expectation and is not given an opportunity to both say